Frank Vaughn, I want to thank you for joining my show today. This is a special day because I'm glad to be alive. um, you can see by the face that, I had an incident and, I survived it. So we can come here and talk about the truth about what's happening in the world today. So thank you again so very much.
Well, and thank you for still putting this on, because as soon as you told me that you got in a crash, I'm just like, hey, man, do you want to postpone this? Like, would you like to rest your face, maybe put some ice on it? And he's like, no, the show must go on. So Clyde do something is definitely doing something.
Yeah, doing something for sure. Yeah, so we showed this picture earlier. So for people who are like, what the heck happened to your face, Clyde? This is what went down. I had a car accident today, and it was at work, and car lost traction on the highway, went down an embankment, took out a bunch of weeds and a bunch of stuff. I was very lucky because 10 seconds prior, if I had lost control, I would have gone into a rocky creek, and 10 seconds after, I would have gone into a rocky creek. So somebody was looking over my shoulder today, and I'm still with you. I'm still here with you. Of course, it felt like I went up against Tyson because I got the airbag in the face. I got all of that, and including I lost a good pair of glasses that I had. It just exploded instantly on impact. That's a thing. So please, if you're driving, be very careful, be safe. If you think your car needs repairs, get those done ahead of time. Even though I was the technician that was to be repairing that one. These things happen. Stay safe out there, folks. Wear your seatbelt, because that's what saved my life today. So without further ado, let's get into this. Frank, you were a member of the PPC party, and you were there in the early days. Now, a lot of people are trying to convince me, convincing a lot of other people. I've actually likened the PPC to, I compared them to the Jehovah's Witnesses of the political movement in Canada. They just won't leave me alone in my DMs. It's always knock, knock, knock on your door, that kind of thing. Now, that being said, I think there are a lot of well-intentioned people who have the right motives to get into it. But the more I dig into it, and the more that gets revealed to me, the more it seems like a sour situation. And in recent times, we had Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, go on the PBD podcast to say his piece about Pierre Poilievre, the conservative candidate that's going into the thing. Now, I'm not running some sort of repair segment for Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre's a big boy, and he can handle himself. But I do want to have a look today at kind of the motives of what Maxime Bernier is doing, and where maybe he comes from in all of this. So first and foremost, would you tell us about how the People's Party came to be in the first place? And we're talking before Max Bernier. Were you a founding member? You were part of it when it began?
I was one of the original registrants. So when you register a political party with Elections Canada, you have to supply it with 250 signatures. And mine, along with 10 of my friends, were among those original signatures, which are part of the record at Elections Canada of the founding of the People's Party. So that's where it started. It came out of, there was a number of things with the Conservative Party of Canada, a number of problems that were present in 2017 and 2018. There were issues with the leadership vote. There's various reasons. I don't think we need to get lost in the weeds there, but they had a bunch of phantom ballots show up. It was a very close race, and Scheer was kind of given the nod by the Conservative Party establishment. There was also a convention that followed, because Max stayed with the Conservative Party and voted with them for quite a while after that leadership vote happened. There was also a convention, and at that convention, a bunch of people left feeling disenfranchised. They didn't get to advance their ideas on the convention floor. There was a bunch of what would you call it? Not electioneering, but not directly rigging, but procedural stuff that denied people their voices. And there were other events too. There were other narrative events that were going on at the same time that were just narratives. But the bottom line is, eventually Maxime quit during that convention. And out of that idea, we're talking late 2018 was the first actual rally I think we had in Etobicoke, in Toronto. There was probably 400 or 500 of us there. And that was when the intention to form the party was announced. I'm not even sure we had a name at that point. And yeah, from there, the party was founded, and it was to be a representative people's party with an actual constitution and process that couldn't get railroaded like the CPC process was at the time. So it's kind of where it started.
Right. So it did actually start around the idea of Maxime Bernier coming in to be the first leader.
Oh yeah, for sure. So when we established it, it was recognized that there was an election coming up in 2019, and that there was only about 8 to 10 months to get ready for that election. And so the idea of having a founding convention or having a constitution was put on the back burner so that we could field candidates and we could actually be ready. And all through that campaign, what we told the public was, we are a party of the people. We are not a party of one. We are a party of many. And we want to truly represent something different in politics. We wanted to do politics differently. That was our message. But coming out of 2019, the script flipped for a lot of people, not myself, and it became a party of one. It was Maxime's party. He established it in a vacuum. That's what the narrative said. And the people just disappeared. And in 2025, there's still no people in the People's Party.
Right. And so when most people when you get in interactions with a lot of people who are involved in the party today, they're pushing Max's platform, his ideas that he espouses to. And there's this, I find that there's this purity test that you get with every one of these people that come at you. This is, at least this is my experience, and it's not every single person, because I've had Payman, who's the representative, or the one who's running in my riding. I've had him on my show, Payman Escara. He's great. He's fantastic. He doesn't sort of fall into the same category that I think a lot of the people that come in on the sidelines have been. He's his own person, and he says that he espouses the ideas of the platform, and that's what he's there to do. And I hats off to him, right? He's doing a good job. But this isn't the experience that I've been getting from a lot of other people that are trying to push the party. And it's like an agitation sort of thing. It's I don't know if you get what I'm saying here, but it's this purity test. You have to be along the lines puritanically conservative enough for them, or you get rejected. Is that a real, like, is that a good description of it?
They talk about the policies and they talk about the platform. And what I like to remind people is that most of those policies and most of those ideas, a lot of them, were present in the libertarian platform before the PPC dealt with Tim Moen. Now, this is part of the history. First, Maxime was courted by Tim Moen to be the leader of the Libertarian Party. And Tim was looking at stepping aside and letting Maxime come in after he quit the CPC. So there was a lot of touring around, and there was a lot of sharing of information, including donor lists. And Tim and Max had history. Well, then after that interaction, Max left. He ghosted Tim, never spoke to him again. And a lot of those policies ended up in the so-called platform. Now, that platform, it is words published on the internet. That's all it is. They don't own ideas. Millions of people share those ideas who are not aligned with the PPC. And they have about as much chance of implementing that platform as my cat does of implementing its platform, which largely centers around kibble. The PPC doesn't have an actual plan for how to attain office. And what you've highlighted here is the insulting and demeaning nature of many of their most outspoken people. Now, that's not all the people. I'm going to have conversations with several of the people that are still good in the PPC, or people who recently left, who are really good, decent human beings who just wanted something different. And that first crop in 2019, there were hundreds of veterans. There were good police officials. There was ex-politicians there. There were a lot of really good, hardworking people who wanted a party of the people. That first wave was the best wave. We were the most respectful. We were the most responsible. And most of them are gone. And most of them are smarter than I am because they left and they didn't talk about it anymore. But periodically, I still talk about it because I feel a debt of responsibility for registering the party in the first place and getting it off the ground. The promise of a constitution and a people's party, which was broken shortly after that 2019 election, is something I feel responsible for. So I continue to tell the story and talk about it. So you can talk about the platform all you want. It can sound good on paper. And some of those ideas, in spite of what they say, and this is one of my problems with the PPC, they misrepresent. And I'm not here to carry water for the Conservative Party. I don't have a political membership, and I'm not looking to seek one. I'm not looking for a nomination. And as you've seen on my channel, I've been very critical of Pierre Poilievre at different points. I don't like their policy on a number of things. But the fact is, you don't need to misrepresent the CPC in order to criticize them. And a lot of what the PPC does is misrepresent what the CPC in its current form in 2025 stands for.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what I picked up from Maxime Bernier. So Maxime Bernier seems to be quite an opportunist, right? He puts himself in positions where he knows that he could get some political clout, things like that. And I'm not sure what kind of political clout that would get you to getting office, actually getting elected in office. We can talk about that. But these misrepresentations. So he went on PBD podcast because, and that's the Patrick Bet David Valuetainment podcast recently. You know, Patrick Bet David had some choice words for Pierre Poilievre in not getting out onto podcasts. Most people translated that to come on my podcast from his perspective, but it was no, just be on podcasts, get out there, get your name out there. So because of that, Maxime Bernier was mentioned in the whole thing, and then they subsequently had him on as a guest. Now, these are guys that are in Florida. They don't understand Canadian politics. They don't know what's going on in Canadian politics, and they don't know the nuances of some of this stuff. Perhaps they didn't know entirely the history of Maxime Bernier and where he was coming from. And then they just had him on to give a representation of what Pierre was. I think that was an opportunistic moment to say what Pierre's point of view was. For example, saying that Pierre is pro mass immigration, which if you look at his platform, he's said it several times in other interviews. And this is where I say that this is the fault of Maxime or of Pierre Poilievre for not getting out there enough to make sure that his point of view is clear to the public. He's only said these things on a handful of podcasts here and there. Hopefully, for his own sake, he can make his own opinions clearer. But I think this was an exercise in Maxime Bernier just trying to misrepresent, as you're kind of getting at there. Correct?
Well, Max's mission, I think now, his raison d'etre, is to undermine the CPC, and that's fine. And I think that's been his objective the entire time, all the while successfully monetizing a very small sliver of the population, which maintains his paycheck, his expense account, and the fees that are paid out for HQ to function, his headquarters to function. So what bothers me about the entire thing is that I've talked about the 51st state idea. I've talked about Western separatism. I've made side-by-side comparisons of the rights of citizens in the United States compared to the pseudo rights that we have here in Canada.
We have privileges here. We have.
They can be suspended at a whim, and then it goes to court after the fact, and they're found to have violated your rights, and nothing happens. No, like our rights are they're not rights; they're privileges. The state can take them away at any time. So you can make that comparison, and I have made those comparisons before in my work, but I would never pimp myself out, because that's the other thing. He made the calls. Alex Jones actually highlighted the fact that Maxime called him to see if he could come on his show, and his team called these podcasters and said, "Hey, I'm willing to come on," and essentially not just throw the CPC under the bus, which is expected, but also undermine the national position. So it's one thing to make comparisons and talk about Canadian weaknesses. I think it's another thing entirely to go on an American podcast and throw the country under the bus. I wouldn't go that far myself. And I think that there's a somewhere out there, and this is one of my problems with the Conservative Party, is this diplomatic middle road where you can say that the Americans are justified, and I know you've talked about this on your channel, in highlighting our drug problem and highlighting our money laundering problem and highlighting the corruption problem here in Canada and the fact that we're infiltrated by the CCP. I think you can highlight those things and give a nod of respect to the Americans calling us out for that without just throwing the entire project under the bus. And you're right. It's the fault of Pierre Poilievre for not going on podcasts and explaining his own positions, but people don't understand. He's advocating for visa cancellations, which will affect a lot of people, will in effect involve the self-deportation of a lot of people. He's talking about reducing immigration levels back down to where Stephen Harper was. Before this idea, this PPC purity test, where it's basically, I don't know what their actual policy is today, but a lot of them have communicated to me that we need a moratorium for 10 years, zero immigration. And I'm not sure how that works in Canada. We've always had immigration. We're always going to have some kind of immigration. It's a matter of what kind and where people are coming from and what kind of immigrant we're bringing in. Instead of 1 million coming in every single year from widely disparate sources that are not good for the Canadian economy, being selective and picking what we need. But the original policy position of the PPC was lowering it back down to Harper era numbers, which is where Pierre Poilievre is today. Now, Bernier and the PPC have revised their position, but I believe it was a press conference 2 or 3 days ago, and maybe you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but he talked about 250,000 a year. That's Harper's number when he left office.
Yeah, no, that's where he is. And I believe he's been there for a while. He's just mentioned it.
He's communicated well.
Yeah, it's just not communicated well. And, that's been my criticism of Pierre Poilievre as of late, was get out there and explain this stuff. Instead of the slogans, get out there on many, many podcasts and explain these things over and over again. So if anyone says you have an intellectual disparity between, this policy and that policy, you can say, well, go visit the long form. I spoke about this here, there, and there. And if you see discrepancies between what I'm saying, point it out to me, but I'm saying the same message, that kind of thing. I think that's a brilliant tactic. I think the tactic of, and I know he doesn't want to be compared to Donald Trump, but the tactics of Donald Trump and have your melee is to go out and go to every little tiny podcast, get out there. And I'm not talking just political podcasts. Go out there on some, I don't know, Mr. Beast kind of guy and get yourself shown in front of a bunch of kids that are apolitical. Maybe you'll get them motivated. That's really the idea. And that's the pushback that I've been giving when it comes to Pierre Poilievre. But we can all have our disagreements on strategy, and that's really what that is for me. I disagree with the strategy of Scheer and O'Toole of sounding very conservative and then going very liberal sounding afterwards to appeal to Torontonian liberals. I think it's a bad strategy, and it'll end up the same way, in my opinion, when it comes to that. Now, Maxime Bernier is trying to be the bolsterous guy. He's trying to fill the shoes of your Donald Trump or whatever. What I get out of it, though, is I just get this feeling of disingenuousness. Now, I've had him on the show twice, and I see comments all the time. Well, if you disagree with Max, invite him on the show. Everyone's got an open invitation on the show. Max has been on twice, and he's since unfollowed me and doesn't reply to anything that I say to him. But apparently, from your experience, that seems to be the norm in this movement. Dish it out for a bit and then cut people off and then never speak to them again. Is that correct?
Yeah, he blocks you as soon as you start asking critical questions. And so the mistake that I made, and this is the other thing about the PPC that bothers me, is you will hear them talk about a coup, that I tried to stage a coup and take over the PPC, that I wanted the leadership. And that's false. And you're going to hear about it from some of their highest placed organizers by the time I'm done, because it's fake news. It never happened. For one thing, there is no succession plan with the PPC. The PPC, as it sits right now, is a 4-man board of directors, and Maxime sits at the top of it. If something happens to him, God forbid, there is no succession plan because there's no constitution. There's no member rights. There's no mechanism for a new leader because they haven't created one. So there would have been no way for me to take it over. And secondly, I had a young child. I wasn't about to become the leader of a national party, even if I wanted to be. I felt the idea was absurd. People suggested it to me, but I turned it down at every opportunity. My issue when I quit, and we're talking May, June of 2020, we came out of the election in 2019, October of 2019. Everybody went on vacation. Max went to Florida, HQ shut down, and pretty much took the entire winter off, which I thought was a really bad move. When you're a new party and you're trying to punch up and out, you got to keep rolling like you won that thing. You know, you got to keep working. So I was always looking for the work ethic, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So that was one thing. Then the second thing was we were supposed to have a constitution, we were supposed to have a convention, and we were supposed to give the members their rights and create a formal party. And that idea just disappeared from the conversation. So privately, I had a number of conversations with all the key organizers because I would sit at Max's table. I gave the opening speech at the first conference, and I emceed. We had an event in Hamilton where we had to break protest lines and everything else to get in there with Dave Rubin, Maxime Bernier, and Professor David Haskell, and I emceed that thing. So, like, I used to be able to talk to all these people. And I said, we got to do this constitution, and they didn't want to do it. So I tried to talk about it privately. It didn't work. And so then I went public. I made a video, and I talked about the fact that it was a registered not-for-profit corporation, and nowhere in the corporate filings or anything does it say they intend to win an election. It's an advocacy group. And as long as there's no constitution for the party that's layered on top of the not-for-profit, there's no party. There's no members. There's no rights. Everybody exists as serfs or donors. They can work for free or they can send money, but they can't advance policy. They can't vote on anything. And if they have an electoral district association and they pick their own nominee from the local pool, Maxime can come in and at a whim kick them out and put his own person in there. And he did that. So there's no party structurally. And one of the arguments is that if they had a party structurally, people would take it over. It would be undermined. It would be usurped. And my argument, my pushback on that is,
isn't that democratic?
But if you have a charismatic leader who's truly charismatic, if he's the populist he says he is, if he's the leader that he says he is, he should be able to convince his people to stay with him. And if he did that, guys like me would have convinced the people. We would have made compelling arguments, and we would have kept them in line that way. But instead, he's chosen this path, and I think that's why the PPC is within the margin of error on every poll to this day.
So explain this to me, because like I know members of the audience won't get this because maybe I don't understand it quite fully. How is a party to be put together? You talk about that it's a corporation and that there's no constitution. What is the correct way to put together a party in Canada?
So there's nothing wrong on the surface with having a not-for-profit. With the CPC, they have something called the Conservative Party Fund, which is separate from the actual political party. So there's the PPC, which is the registered not-for-profit, and then there's PPC, which is the registered political party with Elections Canada. Both those things exist independent of each other. But the difference is, whether it's the Libertarian Party, the Conservative Party, the Green Party, the Liberal Party, New Blue in Ontario, or what's the other one? The Ontario Party, is that what it's called? The one with Hillier and Derek Sloan, their new parties.
Is that what that's called? I know of the New Blue. I haven't heard of the other one.
So they all have these constitutions, which dictate if you're a member of those parties, here's the rights that you get, here's the privileges that you get, here's the costs, and here's how you can elect leaders, here's how you elect candidates. And it gives you something to work with so that you can structurally work within the party. Every major political party has one of these. And these new parties, New Blue in particular, had one pretty well right away. Now, the PPC has been around for 7 years. They still haven't held a founding convention where members can vote on governing documents. Everything descends from on high because it's a corporate structure. It's designed to function like a dictatorship. And it's public information that Maxime does not intend to change that until he retires. And my guess is that he's going to spend their war chest fighting the Conservatives in this election. And I'm guessing he's going to retire, leaving the PPC broke and without a leader. That's what I think is going to happen. And that worries me because we were trying years ago to create an alternative party that was better. One of our mottos was doing politics differently. And we did it differently in a way, but we did it worse. And that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem, yeah, it definitely seems different, a different way of doing politics. What feels to me like politicking, not for the win, but for the sabotage at the end of the day. And maybe I'm just feeling that. Maybe that's the, because of, well, first let's get into this. So there was, I didn't pay that much attention to Max Bernier because he was, a small candidate. I've heard of other people wanting to get involved with the People's Party years ago. Viva Fry. He was a member of I think he ran in Montreal or one of the areas in the People's Party back in 2019. He subsequently left the party, and then that's been that. His whole idea was, try to run for the country before you run from the country, and that makes a lot of sense if that was his motivations. And it all looked really good because it was around the time that you said you were motivated about it as well. But then I started learning more about what was going on, and then it was the last election that Maxime ran in, where it was in Lisgar. I think it was a Portage, Lisgar.
Yep.
And he jumped on the abortion debate, and this became a part of his campaign. And the only reason why this even caught on to me is because so much of this abortion thing was coming up, and I was doing research with a friend of mine, Vesper. I'm on Twitter. Many people have seen him on the channel, but he's very good at research. And we were looking into the abortion thing because we wanted to figure out where Canada actually stands legally in a legal way. And so we looked up, the law surrounding it, the law in the criminal code, because we were curious, like, why is the debate different than it occurs in the United States? You always hear in the United States the argument, when is a human a human? When does life begin? Is it at conception or is it at birth? But in Canada, it's actually defined in the criminal code. This is why people aren't arguing that, at least in the political stage, because that's already been determined. And if somebody wants to change the law, they would have to change the criminal code. I believe it's section 233 that defines a child as when the fetus passes through the birth canal and takes its first breath. This is the criminal code of Canada. This I can't change. That's not my opinion. That's just what the criminal code is, right? So, it could go either way on your opinion, but this is what the legal code says. Now, when Max came in, his plan was to make this new rule that women can't have an abortion until after a certain time. So in the third trimester, it wouldn't be allowed. I looked, and because I'd just been doing research on it, I was like, this is absurd. Nobody are having these abortions. It's not even happening in Canada. Most clinics wouldn't allow for that, not because it's illegal, but just because it's just a practice that they wouldn't do. And the exceptions that he gives are exceptions that are already seen in the medical literature, that doctors would, if a mother's dying, they would perform a thing. So immediately I saw it as this thing that was like, wow, this guy is absolutely just pandering. He's not giving a real platform that's a real thing. He's saying that he's changed his mind on this piece of, or on this topic, because he was in Candace Bergen's riding, which is a lot of pro-life people in that area. So what came out to me was this idea that, so he's just acting like one of the other politicians that we all don't like, right? Just come in with this pandering position and come out with that. So it was at that time that I actually started to question and send tweets at him. What about this? It doesn't go against the criminal code, but you want to pass this legislation, it would get thrown out in court, essentially. The response was just an unfollow and silence, and a lot of attacks from followers. Mm-hmm. Now, when you were part of the party, obviously this stuff didn't occur. Is there any what's the question I should ask here? I'm really getting at the point of where did this sort of mentality come around? When did it become a cult and not people legitimately trying to change politics in Canada?
So the PPC, there's this idea that their platform and their policies haven't changed as time's gone by, and that's just false. They used to. When I founded it, they didn't want to touch the gender issue, and every time I talked about it with Max, it was a firm no, they're not going to get into that. Where that changed was, and this is just a bit of a history of the changing amorphous nature of the policy. There was a man, I don't think I can legally use his name, a man who was in the BC courts. His daughter was being transitioned and he was trying to stop it. And so he was being dragged through the courts, and they had blacked out his name, blacked out his face. You couldn't reveal his identity, and 100 other restrictions. So a bunch of us interviewed him, and we interviewed him in his name. And so we all got served legal notices. And one of those people was Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson. You might know her from on X. And she was a candidate for the PPC in Burnaby. And so anyway, she didn't pull it down. I did. I complied with the legal notices, and I re-interviewed him and complied with the legal notices and got the story out there. But they went to court, and all this went on, and Maxime was silent. He didn't say anything. So I called him up one day, and I'm like, one of our people is in the BC courts right now over this issue. You need to take a stand or I walk. And so he took a stand. And it wasn't just me. I don't want to take credit for that. There was a lot of pressure from within the party that he had to take a stand on the gender issue. So he did. And fast forward in time to this abortion issue and to his catering to evangelical voters and whatever. I don't believe anymore that Maxime ever intended to win elections in this country. And the reason I know that is in 2019, the only seat that mattered in this country for the PPC the most was the Beauce. He had won that seat comfortably with 62% of the vote. And I remember saying to him, you've got to win that seat. If we don't have a seat in the House after the 2019 election, we don't have really good prospects moving forward through time. In my mind, it was a 3-cycle play. The first play was one seat, his seat. And then after that, you grow the thing. But he did this national campaign. He ignored the Beauce. He didn't go back there. And he lost by a huge margin in that 2019 election. Right after that, there was a by-election in York Centre in Toronto. So he went down to York Centre and he ran, and he got 3-digit votes and completely lost any clout he had in the Beauce. The Beauce is a very French riding.
Okay.
So to jump
typically conservative voting riding, or
very conservative, very, very American-esque, very entrepreneurial, very business-oriented, very, very American-spirited. But when he ran in Toronto, he lost the respect of a huge number of the voters in the Beauce and basically buried his chances. I think he's going to run there this time again, and he's probably going to get beat yet again by an even larger margin. Now, the Portage Lisker thing that you're talking about, taking that stance on abortion. So there was a local guy that ran in that riding in 2021. He scored 22% of the popular vote, which is huge for a third-party option. There was a big protest vote over the mandates, which is a pretty important thing to have a protest vote over. So he won 22%. The election that you're talking about was a by-election. So Bernier went in his infinite wisdom. He kicked out the local guy and he said, sit back, I got this kid. He brought his entire headquarters.
They had a guy. They had their own guy.
He brought the whole HQ with him. They spent a huge amount of money renting a hotel. And they often said they couldn't get him out of his hotel room. He proceeded to lose 1/4 of the vote share in that riding, their best riding. Wow. So it's like he came in and he sabotaged the PPC prospects because he couldn't handle having someone else doing the job. If he had to let the local guy run, how much you want to bet they built on their performance? I'm willing to bet they would have. But the people in Manitoba don't respect a guy from Quebec jumping in there to try and represent their interests. So this is all to say it's a theme. And I think it's all about courting certain segments of the populace and convincing them that he represents a solution and solidifying them as a new donor base. And then once he's done, once they're disillusioned with him, like you asking questions of him, he just blocks them and moves on. He moves on to the next trick. And I think that's what's happening with these American podcasts. He's cultivating a new crop of people who don't know the history. And the way that cults propagate themselves is by new members not knowing the past, not listening to ex-members, not understanding where things come from. And that's kind of why I'm here. This is one of the last things I even want to talk about is this. There's so many more important things to talk about.
Yeah, no, I agree.
helped
Yeah,
unleash this. So I feel like I have to talk about it sometimes.
Well, I totally agree with you. There's so many other pressing issues that we could definitely be discussing. But going into this idea of history, so I was very surprised to find out that, well, because of the image that Max Bernier has now, is that he's the anti-elitist, he's the populist. He's never been a part of this Laurentian elite group. He's not a lifelong politician from a family of lifelong politicians. How wrong is that?
It's completely wrong. This is a guy in his, and I put a video out where I show this speech. Like I read this speech, and you have to get it off the Wayback Machine because they purged it from the internet when they figured out that MaximeBernier.com was still alive. In the 2017 leadership bid, he was proud, and he spoke about this in his own words, proud of the Trans-Pacific Partnership as part of his record, bringing that back. And we would have that today if it wasn't for Donald Trump getting rid of it. He was also proud.
For people who don't know, that was a really, really bad, like NAFTA or NFAA or whatever that was with the North Americas, but with Asia. They were trying to pull a NAFTA Asia with us, basically, and it was really bad.
It took away national sovereignty and gave it to a supranational body. So you didn't have any control anymore. So we would have that today, and Max was proud of that. There's the Foreign Investment Protection Act, which we still have today, which happened under the Harper government. And Max, in his leadership speech, was proud of that record. He also said, we needed to open the doors of this country wide open to Chinese money as much as possible, and he criticized Justin Trudeau for going too slow. He also said that China has more freedom than Canada because it has less government. I'm not really sure where he came up with that one. This is a man who is the second most powerful person in the Harper government. He went to Davos. These guys like to lie about Poilievre, and they say that he is a World Economic Forum guy. But there is no evidence anywhere that Poilievre ever even went near it. But we know Max did in 2006. We know he did. And we know that he was instrumental in bringing home the very agendas, Agenda 2030, that he claims to be against today. So there's a lot of this history. Him voting for C-16, him not voting against C-71. There's this huge history. In every single case, he either says, whoopsie, I didn't know what I was doing, or he says, I was following orders. So he's supposed to be the great leader, but he's a self-styled sheep who just had to follow along. And then they turn around and they want to criticize Poilievre for voting how the whip tells you to vote under Aaron O'Toole. And they leave out the fact that Poilievre tried to ban mandates several times in bills in the House. Now, they failed, but they say that he supported mandates. It's not the case. History is very clear. The record's very clear. So, yeah, I mean, Bernier is about as establishment as you get. Now, people can have, and forgive me, I'll finish on this. People can have second chances. I believe in second chances for people. That's why I decided to start the PPC with them, because I thought, here's this guy. He's under the party whip. He had to do what he was told under Stephen Harper, but he's had a change of face. If he explains himself and he takes responsibility for his actions, everybody deserves a second chance, and he got it. And he didn't, in my opinion, he violated that when he broke his promise to his people to present a people's party. Now, in my mind, Pierre should get the same chance because now he's leader. If he had have went against Aaron O'Toole, he would have been kicked out of caucus and kicked out of the CPC, and we don't have a Pierre Poilievre-led CPC. So that's how politics works.
In Canada, at least, there's no you can't protest against the party and what they're doing. Now, that's interesting that's the case. You shouldn't go against the party. Now, it was under Justin Trudeau's led government that they introduced Bill C-16, the one that Jordan Peterson railed against so much. I mean, his whole career is built up on his advocacy against Bill C-16, which incidentally was the law that made misgendering someone a human rights violation, part of the criminal code in Canada. You can be held before a tribunal, all of this stuff. And Maxime Bernier voted against party lines on this one, and he voted for that piece of legislation. Now, I asked him about it when he came on the channel, and he dismissed it as he was given this advice. He was trusting people's advice to vote for this, but it was against party lines. Now, I'm not going to let Pierre Poilievre off the hook entirely on this one. He was an absent vote on. Yeah, he was an absent vote on this one. He didn't vote for or against. And it could have been Pierre's vote that could have swayed it. I'm not sure how close it ended up being, but I know that it was not close. Okay, so there was far too many people excited to bring that piece of legislation in, which is a gross overreach on our freedom of speech in Canada. This idea that just the words that we say offend a particular group of people, and then the language on top of that is quite vague. For all intents and purposes, it's the compelled speech piece of legislation. Now, obviously, that's done. It's already said, and that's in. We would need the government to come in and put through another piece of legislation in order to undo the damage from that one. But this is just another nail in the coffin of the historical reference of what's taken place in this guy's career. And yet there's this idea of a purity test. Well, your guy did this and your guy did that. It's a whataboutism all the time when arguing this stuff. And I don't like getting into this whataboutism stuff with people because I don't know if anybody's my guy. Exactly.
Yep.
But you're going to have to vote strategically, and you vote the way you want. I'm not going to tell people how to vote, but I want people to know more of the truth of what's going on. So when people are telling you this or that, wait a second, let's analyze that. Let's have a look at how that actually played out and weigh the odds on your own. But yeah, I guess the idea of having your guy is it's a bad way to play the game in my.
Given the way that Canada is set up, given the system that we live under, and I've been very critical of the system, I don't think in this particular election, like this election in particular, there's room for absolutism. So that purity test that you're talking about, that you can't vote for anybody unless they are absolutely 100% ideologically aligned with you on every single point. It doesn't work. For one thing, you can see what that philosophy does. It sits you in the margins with 1% to 2% of the vote of people who probably aren't going to vote for anybody else anyway. This election is far more pragmatic than I think any other election that we've had in recent memory. There's a path that's promised by Carney. I will give him credit for being very honest about what he plans to do. He talks about emergencies unending. He talks about free speech curbs. He's talked about dark times ahead. He's the Grim Reaper. He's letting us know that he's the Grim Reaper. I think we should pay attention. Now, under Poilievre, even at a bare minimum, we'll still be able to have this conversation. I worry that we won't be able to under Carney because those things, and this is something I want to do in my work, is remind people of the bills that died when they prorogued and are now dead. They will have to be reintroduced and go back through the House. We got C-63, which is the keep you in your house under house arrest with ankle bracelets because you shared memes. But
it's for the children, Frank.
Yeah, well, it's for the children, right? Yeah, it's for the children, the very children that these guys are corrupting in every single way. Like
it's amazing how they label these bills because it really is that Online Harms Act and something to do with children, right?
It's doublespeak. It is literal. I've never seen it. It's kind of trite to talk about Orwellian doublespeak, but it actually is. I highlighted this in the Ontario campaign where Doug Ford was campaigning on protecting Ontario workers. And he was talking about the trade war and Canadian tariffs. And I'm like, this guy is going to put everybody out of work if he does what he says he's going to do. And if Team Canada applies the tariffs they're talking about applying to the United States, it's going to destroy us. It's actually going to be them. And they're going to try and blame Trump for that. But the fact is, it's their response that will be the most destructive. That's kind of how it works. So he was campaigning on protecting Ontarian workers, but he was the guy who was going to put them out of work. And item by item by item, you go down the list, and what they're doing is doublespeak. It's mind bending, and it's no wonder people are confused and so heavily propagandized that they get angry when you highlight these truths to them and you start to wake them up, because the hypnosis in this country is really deep.
It really is. It really is. And you know what? I'm gonna save that conversation for the after this portion of the stream. So for all of you that are watching this after the fact, this is the live in the live show. We're gonna move on to the Q&A section, and we're gonna have some other topics come up. But if you're watching this after the fact, this is where we end. This is where we part. Good seeing you there. But if you want to catch the live show after the fact, it's available for all members of the channel. So go check that out. If you want to catch that and you don't want to get a membership, that's fine. It's free. You just got to do it live. So go check it out when it's live. Make sure that you're subscribed and the notification bell is rung, because then you'll know when these things are happening.